Hi again. This time I would like to cover some strategies for creating those textures we've been using to texture our 3D objects in the 3D Designer. We're going to start with fractal noise as the basis for all of our textures in this example, in this video. You could really texture with anything. We have a lot of preset built-in bitmaps, that sort of thing, but we're going to go ahead and work with just some fractal noise for now, and we'll also tackle some issues of how to generate a fractal noise landscape height map by using some of the same tools, basically. So I'm going to start with the filters and render plasma noise. Just going to keep the default settings, scale is 7. Hit OK. I'm going to go to my swap image now. There is a button on the top here. Jump to swap image. Pressing that will give me a blank slate, so to speak. This is basically a spare page, clean piece of paper you can work with. You can always jump back to the other one at any point. You can also press S on the keyboard, but be aware there are a few controls in the program that swallow keyboard events. So sometimes you'll be using a tool and you won't be able to use the keyboard. That's usually why. For example, one of the controls might have numeric entry, and it just happens to become selected, and it's just something to be aware of. So I'm going to go ahead and render some more fractal noise or plasma noise using that render plasma noise, and again with the default settings of scale 7. And I'll I'll jump back and forth to show you that we do get a unique fractal noise each time we render with that. So now I'm going to do a few things to make this a lot more interesting looking, because by itself right now it's not particularly interesting looking. So I'm going to use that swap image as a displacement map for this image we're looking at now. I'm going to go to filters and displace by swap. And this basically uses that swap image, that image in that other image we have as a displacement map. And there are different ways you can do this. Regular displace, we just take the pixel values in that image and use that as a literal value to displace the pixels in this image. But there are some other more interesting cloaking displays. For example, sort of a cloaking effect, basically by shifting different values on each red, green, and blue channel, sort of what they did in the movie Star Trek 3, I believe, when they invented the cloaking effect for the bird of prey, is what that refers to, anyways. They did that by changing the timing on the film so that the color timing on the film was different for each, the red, green, and blue, or whatever it is they use in film. I'm not going to go into that, but anyways. Pool displace is what we're going to use now. And we're just going to find a good value to create some very interesting textures here. I'm going to do something about like that. It sort of looks like mud or something that's been caked up. I'm going to hit OK to that. And that's a good start for an interesting texture by itself, but there's some more things we can do to it yet. I'm going to change the color of this first of all and give it a more of a muddy color. Instead of using the default multiply mode, I'm going to use the add mode here. For example, if I added red to it, the darkest color in there would be red, instead of multiplying the lightest color. It actually adds to the color instead of just modifying the existing colors. So I'm going to make sort of a, well, maybe not that orange, but it's sort of an orange color, or brownish orange color. Hit OK. Now I'm going to do some other things with these combined modes that we have. Remembering that we have this the swap image here, and if you go back and forth, you can see there's a correlation between the swap image pixel values and what we have here. For example, this interesting shape here correlates to this little mound we have here is kind of shaped like a peanut or something. But anyways, that's going to be very useful to us when we go into the 3D designer, because it'll look like these mountains are sort of eroded, and down at the base of the mountains they'll have this all this mud that's kind of, you know, washed down into the flat areas, and that's sort of something we want. I'm going to do some other things now to make this more interesting looking, though. Maybe combine with swap and use the complement mode, or perhaps a difference mode. I'll use complement for now. As you can see, this based on this swap image, this gives us a negative effect, but only based on how much of an intensity is here. So if this were black, we wouldn't get the negative effect, but if this was all white, it would be an exact negative, and the gray areas would be sort of an in-between. So as you can see, we've gotten this positive and negative thing going now. And you'd be surprised how natural these blues and oranges will look when mapped to a landscape. I might adjust the colors again, of course. And I think I'll do one more thing to this, but even that by itself would be pretty interesting. I think I will go to combine with swap and use the around gray mode. And what that does is it will, well, it's hard to explain. Around gray basically will lighten or darken the current image based on the previous image, the swap image. Based around that middle value, that 127 out of 256 levels. The middle level will be the neutral, and anything below that will be the negative, and anything above that will be the positive value. So now that we've done that, I might fade that out a little bit so we have some of that original mud look in there still, somewhere about in there. And if we were to go into 3D Designer right now, these light areas would be on the top of our mountains. As I'll go back here, you see the bright areas are where our light areas might look like, you know, mountain, rocky mountains, where the deep dark areas will be in the muddy, shallow areas at the bottom of our landscape, where everything is washed to. And that could be good, or you might want to reverse that, where the mountains are dark and the lower areas is all sand and a lighter color of sand and that sort of thing. So you can always invert this by using color, invert value. That'll keep the present colors, but it'll reverse the value, so you get a negative, but with the existing colors. And I think I'll go with that. I'll go back to our original fractal noise. This is what we're going to use for our height map. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see the entire image. I'll use this this button here. It fits the image onto the screen completely, so we can see the whole thing, and that's very useful at times. And I'm also going to scroll this over, because when we go into that 3D designer, we'll have a little more space now. Transform and 3D designer. And I'm on a netbook, so my hard drive is just taking its time, but it'll get there eventually. Alright, so now, as you can see, I've already selected the color source as from swap image, and we are seeing that texture right now mapped onto this landscape. But as you can also see, our landscape isn't all that interesting, so that's the next thing we're going to do, is try to find some ways to make this landscape a little more interesting. So let me cancel out of this. And as you may have noticed, these hills were just really even looking and just kind of generic. You wouldn't want to build a house on that kind of land. You'd probably want to find something a little more suitable, but we're going to try and find something a little more interesting as well. So one good way to do that is with the Adjust Curves filter, which I'll select here under the filter menu, Adjusting Curves. I've already been playing with this, but let me reset it. Now, This is a tool that lets you redistribute the colors or the values in an image in a simple way, simply by creating a curve. And I'll show you that in action. I'll click in the middle. That'll create a new control point. And as you can see, as I drag around, you can see the interaction in real time. And this curve actually does, in the case of our landscape, this curve actually does give us a sort of an indication of what our hill is going to look like. Originally we had this straight line, and that's basically zero, color zero, or value zero rather, would be on this end, and value 255 would be on this end. So basically you would see it was a linear mapping of values from 0 to 255. But what we've done here is somewhere in the middle, we've remapped these colors or these values, so it is no longer linear, but it is now these middle levels are actually darker than they would have been. In fact, when we go to render our landscape, our hills will look something like what we're seeing here, more of a sharp peak instead of a kind of a generic slope. And I'm going to hit OK to that. And I'm going to go back into the 3D designer. And as you can see right there, we've gotten a lot more interesting looking just by doing that. We have that texture map that was in our swap image. It is mapped as the color source. The color source is from swap image. And we've also applied this curve to make a more unique geometry or landscape from that height map. Now there are a few other things we can do to make this a lot more interesting, and lighting is going to be key to making this look realistic. So I am going to start by turning off the second light by changing that light range down to 0. And now all we have to do is concern ourselves with the first light. The one light we're looking at is, if I turn that on, would basically have no light whatsoever, as you see there. But I'll turn it back up. And as we may remember from previous tutorials, the azimuth lets us rotate that light around the center of our world. The altitude is sort of a height above the surface. And the zenith lets us change the distance from the center. If the zenith were 0, our light would be right in the middle. But if the zenith is further out, our light will be really far away, which is what we want, because the sun is basically far away after all. But we want to go with sort of a morning or afternoon lighting in this case. I'm going to change the light range up some because we just got fairly dark there. And I'm going to change the altitude down because we want the sun lower in the sky. And now all we have to do is rotate that light into the place where we want it. As you can see, I'm doing there. And I'm going to have it directly off to the left and behind our scenery, as you see there. Now we can also go and work on that second light as well. I'll turn the first light down so we can see the second light better. And I'll do basically the same thing I did with the first light. I'll turn the altitude down. I'll put the zenith up. And I'll put the light range up some. And I will rotate that into position. I'll just put it on the opposite side of where the other light is. And now I'll just turn the first light back on. We'll have both lights on at the same time. As you can see there, we have created a much more interesting looking world. I might at this point change our altitude because those peaks are getting a little too sharp and craggy, and it's pretty unnatural looking. Now all that remains to do is to rotate our camera or our world into the point where we want to have our camera viewing the world. It's kind of I'll start by putting that pitch down to almost 0. And two options at this point. We could either move the camera into the right place or move the landscape closer to the camera, I think would be what's really happening. Or we could just scale the landscape. And I think I've done the moving thing before, so I'm going to scale the landscape in this case, which is right under move, by the way. I'll scale both the X and the Z so that this is taking up the majority of our screen space here. And since we scaled that, we might put the altitude up a little bit more as well, as you see there. I might go ahead and move the camera, or yeah, move this a little more into place. It can be a little fussy getting it exactly right. This will probably go a lot better on a machine that runs more than 1 gigahertz and is running on battery power with a video capture software running at the same time. But as you can see, even then it's running pretty interactively. I'm recording 10 frames per second, I believe, at the moment, so you're not seeing what I'm seeing probably. But well, we'll just get through it. Anyways, a few more things that would make this more interesting would be to change the color of these lights so there's more difference between the two lights. You can discern them more clearly. So I'm going to make the first one a little bit more orange, and I'm going to make the second one a little more blue. Now it's a lot easier to discern the difference between the two lights, and we can go in and tweak this more to our liking at that point to get them just where we want them. And all that remains to be done now for this to be a complete image is to add some sky color and to do some final tweaking. I'm going to use a light, not completely saturated, but a light blue, or sort of middle blue, but still pretty light, right about there. And I'm going to turn the fog level up a little bit. This is right here in the center of the panel. Recently moved. We still haven't haven't released the product yet, and we're still making a few final tweaks. But we just drag on that to change that value, and as you can see, that those mountains in the distance are now becoming more foggy and distant looking. We do have one new option in the program, and it's ground fog, which I'll show you here. You click on the ground fog button to turn it on, and there's a low and high value. The high value basically lets you control how high that fog goes up, and the low value is sort of the base level of that cloud. If you put them make them very similar values, your fog will look very opaque, or almost like water, or something instead of a gas. But in this case, I will turn that all the way, the low all the way down, because we don't want it to look too opaque. And we've just created a desert scene of some sort with a lot of mist, which might be a little bit unusual. Deserts are usually fairly dry, but in fact I might turn that down so it's just a small wisp at the bottom of the desert over there. There's still quite a bit more we can do, but I think we've come to the end of another tutorial. As always, we can turn the anti-aliasing on. That'll smooth out some of the pixelization or the jagged edges. There are still more options to explore. There's an option to output the Z buffer to the Z buffer to an alpha channel. That might be worth clicking on. Click on that right there. It becomes bold. Hit OK. And now that that's rendered, we'll go ahead and center this now. And you can see there's a selection here, but if I were to go into Paint on Alpha, under Selection, Paint on Alpha, you would see that our Z buffer has been exported to our alpha channel. The Z buffer is basically the depth of each pixel on that 3D object. And there's quite a lot we can do with that. It can be used as a selection. Say we wanted the background or the back part of our scenery to look different than the front part of our scenery. We could use this as an alpha channel and go in. Let me go back to paint normally. As you remember, this is this is what we have selected is the Z depth. So anything we do now will be a fairly literal adjustment to the depth part of our image. As you can see, we're changing the blue, and now that part of the image that's farthest away is becoming more blue. We could that can be very useful, by the way, if you wanted to get into chromatic aberration, scattering and absorption, and all those crazy things, where light will where the light rays will be absorbed at different rates depending on their frequency. For example, well, I'm not a physicist or anything, but say the background will look more blue than the foreground would be a good way of putting that. And there's quite a bit more you can do with that. You could do depth of field effects. Using the new blur tools would be a good way to accomplish that, incidentally, which has recently been updated. One good tool to do that is, say you wanted the middle part of this image to be in focus, but you wanted the furthest away part and the closest part to be out of focus. You could actually accomplish that. There's a tool under the convolution filter which will actually help with that. I'm going to go into Paint on Alpha, under Selection, Paint on Alpha. Let me move that out of the way so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to go under Filter, Convolution, and ABS, that's absolute value. And an absolute value is not a technically a convolve or convolution, but it is there as sort of a utility to work with some of the other convolutions in that menu. So I'll click on that, and as you can see now, the center of this this object has become dark, whereas the outside and the very farthest part and the very closest part have become white. It's actually sort of split the alpha channel down the middle and reversed the second half of it, you might say. Using this, you could this is still in our alpha channel. I'll go back to paint normally, and now anything that's on the foreground or in the far background is something that will be modified when I use any of our filters. And I'll use that new blur tool to demonstrate this. What should happen is this part in the middle should stay focused, while the part in the foreground and the background should become out of focus, which is more or less what we're seeing here. And I can only wonder what this is doing to our video capture using the GPU like that, and depriving the video capture of access to the screen memory for several seconds at a time. But I hope you're able to view this. Let me clear the alpha channel now, and as you can see, this part right down the middle has stayed more or less in focus, whereas our foreground and backgrounds have been blurred tremendously. And that's one way you can achieve a depth of field effect using the Z buffer information. And there's quite a bit more you can do with that as well. But I think I've covered enough for now. We've covered working with some textures. We've covered some lighting using the 3D Designer again. We've covered using the Z buffer, and also using anti-aliasing, the new fog, the ground fog feature rather, and also the displacement mapping using the swap image, and a few other things that I've forgotten already. So that's about all for now, and surely there'll be a little bit more on the way. We're very close to release now, and well, I hope you enjoy. We've certainly worked hard on this one. This has probably been one of our biggest releases in a long time, so enjoy.